You're tuning in to Neurodiversity, a podcast for neurodivergent adults and the people who love them. Please note that this podcast does not substitute medical or professional diagnosis and advice. All right, so just today, the day of me recording this episode, I went for an eval with a neuropsychiatrist. And I was prepared. I had teacher reports. I had test scores. I had other ancillary like health issue documentation and things like that with me, and just like some other self reports I've done, things like that. And so anyway, I get to this person's office, this doctor's office, and it was weird. Like he started to talk about like he opened up with like telling me what meds I was on. And like he didn't have an intake questionnaire, which I also felt like was odd. There was no intake questionnaire for this appointment. And so like and I'm just like, how do you know that about me? And he was just like, he looked in like the controlled substance database or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, like I mean, whatever, strange, but like it's just like why creep versus just like give me intake info. I'll give you my med list. Like it's not an issue. But anyway, so I think I thought that was like odd from the start. And then like he started just like questioning me about like my ADHD medications and like the ones I've been on and like how I've tried different ones, which is very common in ADHD populations. And then just like kind of like it was weird. Like I felt like he was trying to like trap me into something, like because I was talking about like how I now take Ritalin, and it's like it's not an extended release. It's it's just a short window or whatever to kind of help you out, and I really like that. I really prefer it. And but I was saying like like taking the meds is really helpful for me to kind of like stick with task. And so what I'm talking about is mental effort. So like just kind of short example of that is like I went to fill out an application one morning unmedicated and was quickly like frustrated or whatever by it and just could not. I hit a wall and I couldn't like kind of have that grit to like stick with it. And I mean I was doing it for like I don't know, like maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or something. And it was specifically, that's not important. The point is like I was having issues like to stick it out. But like I was unmedicated. But like if I take my meds and like I can sit through things that like may be more difficult for me or like less enjoyable versus just shutting down. So that's what I was talking about, but I don't know. He was like saying something about like, oh well, if it like something like about if it's shorter, then like how does it help me do things longer or something like that. It didn't make sense. But anyway, so I don't even know why we were talking about that because like I have a professional that's helping me with that. Whatever, that's not what I was here for. So anyway, like he goes on to like talk about ADHD, or I'm sorry, autism, and he's like, well, what do you know about autism? Which I just thought was like kind of like a weird question, but like I don't know, people do things their own way. So I'm just like, well, I know a lot about autism. Like I'm an autism clinical specialist. I didn't say that part, but I'm just like know a lot about autism. Like what do you mean? Like he's like, well, like not like the symptoms, but like how do you know about like I guess he was asking me like how does autism impact me? Like I feel like that's what he was trying to say. But it's just like that's a very broad question to ask anybody. Like that is just so broad. Like especially if you truly I don't know if I want to say that. I'm going to retract the truly part, but especially like if I do believe if you have a neurodevelopmental condition, it really does impact most areas of your life, or at least maybe not all at once, but either over in different time frames, or yeah, like at once. Like it's very much ingrained in your life. So when I talk about like having these conditions, it's not like oh I just hate taking tests or like oh I just can't find my keys. Like no, it's literally like making choices for my life, like getting dressed, like just so much like planning. When do I socialize? How much work do I do? Well, also need like time alone. Like I can't be around people all the time. Like and just like really trying to like figure out so many different like working parts of my life. that it's exhausting, and like also just like doing things I want to do because I have lots of interests and things that like I really want to do, and like if I don't have time to do them, then it's just like very dysregulating. Um, so like yeah, so like it's just like that's a lot, like, and especially that it's something that I can like talk about for the course of my lifespan. To just say like how does it impact you, which isn't actually what he said, but I think what he meant, like then like where do I start? Like that is a very overwhelming, like talk about anxiety. Like that's very overwhelming, and especially with a stranger that you don't know, and you're like that's and it's things that have impacted me like very personally as well. So it was just frustrating. So I'm just like, okay, but I kind of expected this. I had some expectancy of this just from listening to other people's stories, especially women, adult females, and just from my own experience that I've already told you about. And so I had a list, and like my list is it's a spreadsheet. And so like I divided it up in DSM criteria. So social communication and then also restrictive repetitive behaviors and interests. Those are the two criteria for or like the two sections of criteria for autism. That's it. All right. And so like that's oversimplified, but those are the two sections. And so like I have this and I have all the different ways in each of those sections that I've had difficulties, and I have it listed across my lifespan. I also have sensory issues that are listed across my lifespan, that are noted on there. I have physiological issues that are commonalities that we often see in like, the autism community around like gut issues and other things like that. Self-interest behavior, like onset of puberty, like things like that, and just like other commonalities and like difficulties that I'm having within like the neurodivergent community, or like within the category of neurodevelopmental disorders or conditions, right? And so I have all this, and so like I'm starting to like, since I'm the one I guess having to like direct the interview, like I'm starting to like read off, and then he'd like interject or whatever. And so, like, this is the second thing on my list. I've been in this office for like 5 minutes, maybe. And the second thing was that I have difficulty controlling the sound of my voice, or like the pitch, sometimes pitch, but like also like the volume. That's what I'm trying to say. So like, especially like if I'm nervous, especially like if I'm tired, but also just kind of like in other situations, I don't really know first. I don't really understand exactly what impacts it. It definitely comes up more in like group settings, but just constantly being loud enough for people to like hear me or make out what I'm saying is difficult. And sometimes I don't know. I can't tell if people heard me sometimes, or in like they're just busy, or like they're ignoring me, or if they just didn't hear me, and like that in and of itself kind of causes me anxiety. But that's again another issue or a deep dive for another time. So I said this, and then he asked me, he said, well, does this bother you? Like, are you worried that about what other people think about it? And I'm like, yeah. And he's just like, then I can tell you right now, you're not autistic. And I was just like, first of all, we didn't look at any of the other like any of the other criteria, but also like that alone isn't like definitive or indicative of like not being autistic. And so I want to say this real quick. It's just like if you don't take anything else away from this, let's remember that when it comes to autism, there is no specific test. There's no specific test, there's no specific brain scan, there's no specific anything that we can say, oh, you were definitely autistic or you're definitely not. What we do have is research, what we do have are like diagnostic criteria based on the DSM guidelines, and it's really based on clinical judgment to put those things together to fall in those different categories, um, and to assess for autism, right? So it is very opinionated. So it really, really depends on what biases your provider holds. So like, yeah. So anyway, I can tell you right now, and I'm just like what do you mean? Like there's research that talks about like anxiety and like self-awareness, and like how people like within these populations, like there's a correlation. And I have to find this research. I couldn't find it today. I don't know where. Sometimes I read stuff and then I don't track it well, but I'm getting better with that. But like I show like yeah, like how people with more self-awareness of how they're struggling in those behaviors like have higher rates of anxiety and depression because of that insight within this community, right? um and so I'm just like, I'm like, okay, well, are you even like aware of like female presentation, things like that? So like he claims like he is kind of thing, but like later kind of retracts that, right? Anyway, so like that was just kind of weird to me, just that alone. But like then like I just started reading the list and like I'm like anxious at this point because like now I just kind of feel like you've already dismissed me. So like why are we even here? Like why are we still talking? I'm like what kind of just like what's the point? Like I just feel like at this point I'm talking to a wall, which I was, and just like things going in one ear out the other. So I would like read the symptomology and like basically then he would like stop me and be like, oh well like yeah, like those are symptoms, but like they might not necessarily like be because autism. And like, well, maybe they're not, but like you're the professional who should be asking me the questions to tease that out. You're the person who says, okay, well, I can see this in this area, but like maybe it's a pragmatic language issue, versus like ASD or something like that. But you should be doing that work to like have the questionnaires and know what questions to ask. Like he had no clinical instruments other than like I forget, I don't remember what the name of it. I wasn't paying attention. I was too irritated at that time. But like he had me do a very brief like screening tool for autism, which a lot of the questions I scored like very high on, like and that Likert scale style from like like sometimes to like always sort of thing. And so like a lot of my things were like often, most of the time, like always, whatever. On his anyway. I also showed him like a self-report scale that I really like, that's geared towards autistic adults, and it's very thorough and like breaks things down in domains, and also the research on it. While it is like preliminary, it looks like it can be promising, right? So yeah. Anyway, so I do that, and like first he tells me like he's telling me like he doesn't like the questionnaire that I did because like some of the things have nothing to do with autism or whatever, which I disagree, but like whatever. But he's like, this isn't clinical. And I'm like, yes, it is. Like I can show you like the research on it. Then he's, oh well, like just then he's kind of like back to circling around. Well, just because like it's that, like just like an assessment tool basically is what he was saying was like isn't indicative that you have autism, which is so true. Assessment tools are not. So when you do these self-reports online and you get these things, it doesn't mean that you are autistic. It doesn't mean that you do have ADHD, but it means that maybe you likely do, and there's things to explore, and you should explore that with a professional who's well versed in this topic, right? And so I'm just like, why? Like he would just kind of keep explaining like how tools work, or he would give me like general, like a person with autism would do this, and like at one point, like he like came up to me like really close, and, like put his head down and like made eye contact with me because he was saying like eye contact might be something that's difficult, but not always, or whatever. Eye contact is something I personally have struggled with throughout my life, but he like came up to me. He's in a chair. I'm in a chair, and then he like cocks his head to the side, like makes eye contact with me, just like moves his head around and like way like not social distancing at all. Like I do not have the 6 feet that I at least need right now. Like, and it was just like very irritating. I was just so uncomfortable by that, and it's just like he was just like, yeah, like they would do something like that because they don't understand social cues, and I'm just like, I'm not 6. Like I'm 30. I'm going to be 31. Like, dude, like, and also that's not true of all of them. So, there are, um, there's definitely social deficits, often established in ASD. However, like there's this concept of being like socially adaptable and like how we can compensate for issues around like theory of mind, which is something else he was harping about. So just very briefly, like theory of mind, or Tom, it's like the ability to like understand that someone else might have like different motives. Like they may think something differently than you. You might not understand their intentions, or just like what their mental state is, like the way that they're perceiving things, right? You might not be able to read that very effectively. And so there is clinical or research debate around Tom and then if itself, and if it's even really measuring theory of mind, if it's measuring emotional responses. There's implicit Tom, there's explicit Tom. Like there's just it's very deep. It's not like a just like just looks like this thing, right? But there is a lot of evidence that does support theory of mind and like the struggles in theory of mind within autistic populations. However, like the typical theory of mind test, like has a ceiling of like being about age 6, like the developmental about age 6. So it's really not appropriate even for like adults, right? So they are developing other types of theory of mind, but yeah, there's just like this research out there too that just like talks about like like how, there's masking. So like masking, um, is the suppression of um, maybe like your repetitive behaviors, like stimming. It might be like avoiding social events that you might find stressful or draining. But there's also like this idea of compensation, which goes a step further, where you have alternate cognitive strategies to have good social skills, or to maybe have those theory of mind deficits like not impact you as much. And this research I will definitely put in the show notes. And this particular study, it's called Good Social Skills Despite Poor Theory of Mind, exploring compensation and autism spectrum disorder. And what I like about it, while I haven't read the entire methodology yet, I've mostly just read like the abstract and the lit review, which is a review of like literature that's already existing around the topic or like related to the topic. Um, what I do like about it so far is like it has a really good sample size. So in their sample size, they surveyed a total of 136 autistic adolescents, and that's a lot of people for a clinical study. It's not common for you to see that so much. But in short, like what this like study found was that um, there was like a positive correlation for this term of compensation with individuals with ASD who had higher IQs, were able to like have uh, higher ability to like executive function, so just like greater executive functioning skills, and often higher anxiety. They were all correlated. And like what I thought was really interesting was like in this interview, he would just keep like he was just tell me things like, "Oh yeah, you put so much thought into this. You put so much thought into this. You spent so much time on this. This is like so thorough." He's like, and, you can have a lot of anxiety. Like the anxiety is like it's glaring, and it's just like okay, so that is something that we should be scanning for. Like if you see high anxiety in a person, as a clinician, you really want to like see what the origin of that anxiety is. And when it comes around to social deficits and social skills and things like that, like that might be a cue of like, neurodivergence. And you see someone who's very meticulous, and like putting a lot of time into this, like I don't know if everyone would put as much time into designing just kind of like the prep that I did. Um, and like this has become like very much a restrictive interest of mine, just neurodivergence. I'm leaning more towards autism, but like I don't know, what time is it right now? It's like 12 in the morning. It's actually 102. This is what I'm doing. um, this is often what I'm doing is like reading up on these sorts of things. And so I just thought it was really interesting that like there was no awareness of like even the things that he was acknowledging could be a part of an autistic profile. um, and so I just thought that was really interesting. But something that was also really common is like um, while these people can, autistic people who are able to do this compensation and like, air quote, appear normal, what they are finding is that these individuals self-report exhaustion, and that was like a common theme, right? And so like last year, like I really couldn't work. I just had a lot of difficulty with working, and I'm not going to get into the gist of that totally yet because I'm not totally sure how much of my personal life in detail I want to share right now. I'm still kind of working that out. But anyway, the point is that like I had this like major just kind of halt in my life and just major decrease in functioning. And like he didn't even ask any sort of clarifying questions about it. He's like, oh, okay, like no clarifying questions. He had no structured interview to give me. And again, like there's not one test, but as a clinician, one would think that you would have standardized measures to use, that you would be asking for information from either relatives or teachers, or you might be looking at test scores. You want to um yeah, like you want to do those things and then like take this information, review it, and like really start to come up. I thought like he would do testing, but I guess he doesn't do that either, which was interesting. I'm actually just kind of curious of what he even does for autistic adults, because there's no medication for autism. But that's like a whole nother thing. So anyway, like the point is that like theory of mind really needs to be measured by scales. And so, they're like to measure someone's theory of mind with the research and the article that I'm going to read in the show notes. They were saying like how they could find people who have these higher IQs. Mm, I don't know how I want to word this. I guess like a better time, or like a greater ability to executively function, and who had high anxiety. What they found was that yes, they could um, verbally, compensate, but like nonverbal um, interpretations, there was still there were still impairments in that, and I don't know, I won't get into all that because I don't know if that's really what y'all are here for. But if you want to know more about it and talk to me, I would love to have a team. I really would, to really just go through research a bit more, to have like minds to talk about them, to think of ideas like that all sounds so wonderful to me. um but anyway, again, digression. So, I guess the last part, just kind of like with the doctor or whatever. So, at one point he says to me, like, I need you to prove, I'm looking for you to prove to me that you have autism. And I'm just like, that's not how diagnostic interviews work, bro. Like, like, I'm not here to like prove to you that. Like, I'm here to like share my experience, and hopefully you should have like a system to like extract that information. And then like at one point he's like, yeah, like you have all this, but like, what does the data say? What does the data say? Or like, whatever, like, like the criteria. And I'm just like, dude, like, I have all the criteria listed out. I have multiple difficulties in the DSM criteria alone, along with commonalities. And he's like, well, yeah, like, like, a lot of autistic kids do have, a lot of gut issues, but not all of them. I was just like, that's true, but like, what is it like? But I do have gut issues, and I also can endorse symptomology in the domains of the DSM criteria and in common domains within the autistic community. And it's just like you refuse to look up the big picture. So it was just really interesting. And he would just kind of come back and be like, you did really well in school. Like, you have a graduate degree. Like, yeah, like, so, like, it was just pretty much, I was just too smart. And apparently, because I was self conscious, there's no way I could be autistic. And it was funny because my sister was in there, and she pointed out to me, like, in the end, that he was saying in the end, like, autistic adults who, have more independent living skills, or, professional careers or whatever, that they only want to work in like isolated, areas, and like, in research, or they're in the back, and they would never get into therapy because they wouldn't want to talk to people all day or whatever. And one, I don't think that's true in and of itself, as I know autistic therapists. And also, like, I've read reports around like how um, women with autism typically often do gravitate towards fields like therapy and things like that. But he was just like, there's no way that you would ever want to even study like people, and like and like how people work or whatever. Because I told him, he asked me why I got into the field or whatever, and my reasoning is because like I've always been fascinated by like human behavior, and I've always been trying to figure out why people act the way they do. I don't get it. like I've been doing that all the time. I've also like my entire life have been like looking into whether it's like astrology. When I was young, I was really into astrology quite a bit. I am again now on a deeper level. And also like personality tests, things like that. And all these things, again, like they definitely have their I guess their cons or whatever. But like the point is, there's a trend in me really trying to like figure out behavior, and my behavior, and like the behavior of other people, and like how they're different, and like how that works, and that kind of thing. Like I have a history of that. But he's saying like you would never want to do that as an autistic person. And like I just don't understand why. Like, are artistic people not capable of curiosity? As I don't know that to be the case. Like I don't know that to be the case. And like he told me before too, like um, he had an autistic female patient, and like she said something inappropriate about like going to dinner, and like but like now she doesn't say those things or whatever because like she's got bad responses, and I've like been saying things like that, and I've pointed that out to him. He was just like, yeah, but you learn from your experiences. It's like if you're autistic, you can't learn from them. And I'm just like, what? Like autistic people can't learn now? Like that's nuts. That is absolutely nuts. And like I felt like also like if that was the case, we would have never had ABA. Like we would just never had ABA. Like as applied behavior analysis, which is like a controversial way of dealing with autism and like the behavioral side of some things. Um, and I'm not going to get into that right now or the controversy. I remember I was telling him about like, yeah, like when I was a kid, I didn't have a whole lot of meltdowns until puberty. Like I couldn't control them anymore in puberty. But like as a child, it didn't. But I lived in a very like authoritative or authoritarian, I should say, very authoritarian household that was abusive. Like it was physically abusive and abusive in like other ways, and like that wasn't an option for me to just melt down because I didn't like my food touching or like whatever. Like, and he was like, no, if you were autistic, like, you wouldn't be able to like control that. That's just not true. Like it's just not true. And like I think there's plenty again and plenty of evidence around like the harm of ABA and like why that's true because like it does, yeah, it stops behavior but because of the negative external consequences, but it doesn't change like the internal difficulty. And so like if autistic people weren't able to learn from like the consequences that they face, like ABA would never work. It just wouldn't. Like it just, it wouldn't work. um so yeah, that's that. I'm gonna wrap this up though. But my sister though, she thought what was funny was that he was saying like how autistic people, wouldn't want to work with other people or whatever, and they're always in the back. And he was like, yeah, they would. My sister was like, yeah, she's like, that's exactly what you're trying to do. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't even really pick up on that because that's been something that's been hard for me. And one of the reasons I had such a struggle last year. Like I'm transitioning out of individual therapy. It's not something that I can sustain at a rate that would give me, a living wage to support myself. Like if I was just like, chilling, not worried about money, and I could see a couple clients here or there, sure, like I would do that. That's cool. But like, in order to like keep a full caseload, like I can't cope with that. I don't have enough energy for myself afterwards. I don't have enough energy to participate in like relationships in my own life, and like I can't self-sacrifice having a good quality of life in order to help other people. I'm not doing it right if I'm doing it that way. And so I've done a lot of thinking about really transitioning out of individual therapy and talking to people as much because it just really is, it's very exhausting. While it can also be rewarding, it's still exhausting. And so I'm looking at transitioning my practice into uh, focus on neurodivergent or just evals in general, but with an emphasis on neurodivergence, and really having that as a part of the differential diagnoses. And yeah, and I'm also just looking into like doing more like group work or like workshop type things where it's not like an individual thing. I feel like that's just going to be more my speed, and yeah, just helpful for my mental health and ways to help other people. Because I certainly won't tell you if you're self-aware that there's no way you can't be autistic because there's just tons of research that says otherwise. But yeah, that's that. And I think like all in all, like while I was a little bit briefly upset by the experience, I'm really happy that it happened and these other experiences because what I've learned a lot is what not to fucking do. I learned a lot of what not to fucking do by being on the patient side of things. And I've also just learned like I don't have to be so hard on myself because like while I'm rolling out the diagnostic process that I want to do, like I'm very much about being thorough, being using ethical tools or tools that efficacy. That's the word I was trying to use to say. So just tools that are proven to work, peer reviewed, and yeah, like I really want to lay down something that is helpful and not half ass and ways to like rule out other conditions and things like that. But what I'm learning is just like, especially men and also just like other clinicians, like they're not doing that. Like they're not even doing half of that. Like they're clearly not up to date on research. Like they don't have like clear cut diagnostic um, development and how they're going to tease these things out. A lot of them are just kind of like going on their what they might have learned however many years ago and like their fucking intuition, like and just kind of their opinion. And that's not enough and we got to do better. So I'm gonna do better, and I feel like this is just a sign for me to go ahead and move forward in what I'm doing. So stay tuned. I will be opening up diagnostic services for neurodevelopmental evals, and I am excited to talk more about that. Okay, I had to jump on postscript just to mention a few things. Hopefully, I keep them straight and I remember them. But about this doctor. So, the last one that I just recently saw, I don't know, I'm just gonna call him Dr. Quack. But, like, so, like, Dr. Quack, something else they said to me was just talking about, like, because I told you, like, he'll give me, like, these random, like, generalizations of how people with autism would behave, as if it's not, like, a diet yeah. Anyway, um, but like yes, he would give me like these random, like yeah, stereotypical examples, and so he talks about yeah, or like like how Sheldon like on the Big Bang Theory now he needs like to compute relationships or whatever, and like first of all like I just feel like that was not a great example. Like Sheldon is definitely like a stereotype. He's a trope. Like he is a trope of like the autism community, and like there's just so much research and evidence that autism is way broader than fucking fictional Sheldon. And especially like after like criticizing like actual like clinical like review and like actual diagnostic symptoms, like you're telling me I don't act like Sheldon, so I don't have the autism. Like where did you get your degree from, sir? Like what are you saying to me? Um, so like I just thought that that was crazy. I think what's also funny is like I often tell people that like I think that humans should have conditional logic. Like so conditional logic if you're, into any sort of coding, it's like, if then, like if this happens, then this happens, if this is inputted, then like produce this result. And like relationships would be so much more easy if we just acted like that because there's way too many fucking variables and then you think you choose the right one and then you still don't get the right outcome, and it is very distressing. So I thought it was funny because like one, that just wasn't a very professional like analogy to make. But two, like I also do resonate with Sheldon in ways. I'm just like aware of like, yeah, I have awareness, and that's something that autistic people can have. Um, so yeah, I don't act like Sheldon, but maybe I might experience some of the same internal frustrations as he does. But once again, I don't even know if the actor who plays Sheldon is even autistic. Like, it was just wild to me. I feel like if anything, like if someone was gonna tell me like about a fictional like character, which I guess he's not actually fictional, but like if he would have been like, yeah, like Larry David, like I would have broke with that. I would have been like, I get it, because like I be watching Larry and I be empathizing way too much. Like I be in his shoes. I just be like, yeah, yeah. Me and Larry, like we got telepathy or something. Cause like I'll watch an episode and then I'll be like, this is what I would do, or like, or this is how I would handle it. And then like Larry ends up doing the same thing. And it's just so funny to me. I be feeling Larry. I don't agree how he always handles stuff, but I get where he be coming from. Anyway, and then like lastly, like the thing that he said to me too was like when he was talking about like how autistic professionals will only be like in the background and like in work that isn't engaging with other people. Well, I think that that might be common. I don't It's not like a fact of like all autistic people act like that or have that. Like I mean there are autistic actresses, actors, models, like you name it, singers. So like that's just like not a fact. But like what I did point out though is that there are autistic lawyers, like they exist. And then he said to me, he was like, oh yeah, but no, but like lawyers, like they have a very streamlined process. Like they don't deviate, they don't have flexibility. They streamline. And I was just like at that point, I was just like, he is full of shit. That's when I knew he was full of shit and I had to go. I mean, I think I knew I should go earlier, or at least I knew not to take it seriously. But like then I was just like, okay, you're just really grasping for straws. I'm like, while I have like some issues with social communication and like repetitive behaviors, I'm not dumb. Like I'm not stupid. And like you are just telling me so much stupidity right now. But anyway, that's that. I'm gonna let that go and not harp on it anymore. At least I think. Yeah, all right, that's the end of my postscript. Toodles. Okay, so that's my spill on just my experience so far. And that's just like neurodivergent, like diagnoses experience. I've had some difficulty with finding a therapist that understands. I probably won't make a whole episode on that, but I guess just briefly, I met a therapist, and on the intake, I already kind of knew it wasn't great. I wasn't like uh, really talking about autism much at that time. I was really, I mean, like it was on my radar, but even just with ADHD, I was trying to like kind of vet her. And I was just like, oh, like, like, what do you know about ADHD? Because she has it like on her bio or whatever kind of thing. And what she said to me was that she was just like, well, with ADHD, it's all about the skills. It's all about the skills. And like, it's not rocket science. You just have to do the skills. Like that in of itself tells me that she doesn't know much about ADHD. Because that's just so common in the ADHD community. Like we're gonna drop the skills, like with systems and things like that. Like we are consistently inconsistent, and we can't always maintain whatever skill sets that we've learned. So we have to be really creative and have multiple skill sets, like backup skill sets. Like having some sort of like coping skills or whatever it is specifically that we're looking at, like menu to kind of choose from. So that was kind of like red flaggy. But like as I kept talking to her, like it just got worse. It got worse and worse, and it was very much like she thought we were friends, and like we were like at brunch to chit chat, and not she was a therapeutic professional. That one should be like non-biased and non-judgmental, but also should like acknowledge honestly their scope of practice. And it was just very clear, like talking to her, that she did not have any sort of expertise and autism or ADHD, I mean, while she may have like brushed over it in school or took a CEU, clearly that was not her cup of tea. Um, but that was like a very interesting experience that doesn't deserve a whole lot of commentary. Other than that, like I've had pretty good therapeutic experiences. I think what's really been hard is just like the intersectionality of it. Because I had a really cool therapist briefly, and she herself was autistic. Um, but she was a white woman, and when it comes to really just like talking about things that I've experienced and the difficulties and the complexities, like it has a lot to do too with just like my racial identity. And so, kind of going back to that idea of intersectionality and having identities, like I don't believe in a hierarchy of identities. Like I am my identities like at all times. Um, Especially because I don't really have transient roles, I guess. I don't know. Never mind. I'm not going to even get into that. But yeah, like I'm not black first and then queer, or like queer first and then neurodiverged. Like I'm all these things all the time, and they intersect. So yeah. Anyway, and then yeah, I never really talked about either. Just kind of like more on the medical side. I actually haven't had like a very terrible like medical experience. I guess I talked to you a little bit about the auditory and the ophthalmology. But outside of that, like I've actually had like pretty awesome practitioners for the most part. My allergist is wonderful, love her. So yeah, I'm not gonna keep complaining, but I just really wanted to like highlight why self-diagnoses I feel like often may be someone's only choice. Actually, kind of going back to that doctor that I saw most recently for the neuro eval. What I thought was really funny was like funny in hindsight was basically like he kind of asked me like he said something along the lines of like I can find out like and determine whether or not I'm autistic like online. Like he didn't really know I like had to come see him to talk about it. And I just like felt like that was really interesting to like say that I could just kind of like self-diagnose online, but then like talk about how you don't like um the self-reports or how they're like not indicative, and then like also just like not have like any sort of structured interview process for this, and just kind of jumping around and interrupting me and like ask me one question and I'd start to answer, and like ask me another question, and like it's different, and I'm just like, what do you want from me right now? Very, very frustrating thing. But again, I think it's what I needed. It's what I needed to just really be like, all right, I got this. Like I am, I am sound, and I have research and training and data to back up the process that I would like to use. So yeah, keep me on your radar. If you haven't, you can go to my website, therapywithjasany.com, and you can sign up for my email list. I won't be sending you any emails right now because I'm not really messing with the email list. But if you sign up, when I do send them out, you will get them. And also just stay tuned on the podcast. Stay tuned on the IG page in DT on IG. I've been really slow to start to post things on there for similar reasons I told you about self-diagnosis and just kind of things being trendy and maybe like oversimplified or outside of context. So I've been really just kind of sitting with and shuffling through how I want to show up in that space in a way that I feel maintains my clinical integrity and clinical judgment. Um, so, yeah, if you're out there, you're self diagnosing, if you're out there and you're having a hard time finding providers that are um, competent in current findings, and also just someone who's going to really take a big not big, but like a broad approach as far as like biopsychosocial, really seeing like how is this affecting you, yeah, biologically, psychologically, also socially. Really just looking at, you know, other domains such as like proprioception and interoception and things like that that we find a lot of difficulty or we had issues with in autism. Yeah, if someone's not looking at those things, I think outside or in conjunction with, I should say, the DSM criteria. Um, yeah, that sucks. It sucks, and it is a disservice to people in the autism community. So I just want to say I'm here with you. I'm doing my best to get things out to serve you, especially if you are in Ohio, and hopefully soon in the near future, I'll also be practicing in California. Yay! But yeah, stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in. This is long. I appreciate you listening. Like, share, subscribe, rate, and do all the things. You know what? I need 20 more listeners to start to run ads, help your girl out, make some money. Because as you know, people in the indie community, especially those of us who are autistic, have higher rates of unemployment and underemployment. That's also true of ADHD. I think the numbers are a little bit different, but depends on where you look. Anyway, nonetheless, yes, share, please, play, have other people play so I can get this ad money if you hear me. You feel me? Okay, goodbye. I need to go to bed.